to the woman whose wisdom has brought peace and elegance back to this household. Nathaniel Whitaker lifted his glass and looked directly at Victoria Ashcombe. Not at his wife, not at the woman who had saved his dinner that morning. Corrected his guest list, rewritten his speech, quietly held his entire estate together for 10 years without a single word of thanks. Evelyn Hartwell did not flinch. She reached down, picked up the family ledger, removed the brass key from its clasp and placed it beside his wineglass. Then she stood up and walked out. If this story reaches something you've carried quietly for too long, subscribe. Follow until the very end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. I need the ham rerouted by 8 o'clock or this dinner doesn't happen. Clara looked up from the kitchen doorway. Ma'am, the ham spoiled overnight. Evelyn was already moving toward the back corridor. The household ledger open in her hands. Send Thomas to the Alderman farm. Tell him we need whatever they can spare before noon. Tell him I'll settle the account personally. Mr. Whitaker is still asleep, Evelyn said without breaking stride. And he doesn't need to know. That was how the day began. By 7 in the morning, she had rerouted the menu, dispatched Thomas on horseback, and rewritten the kitchen schedule so that nothing would run behind. By 9, she had received a letter from the florist's boy, wrong flowers, wrong color, and solved it by sending Clara to the market with specific instructions and a list she had written in under 4 minutes. By 10, she had discovered that 2 families with a violent land dispute had been placed directly across the table from each other on the guest list, and she had corrected the seating arrangement with a revised copy delivered to the dining hall before anyone else had noticed the error. None of it reached Nathaniel. That was the point. Her entire role in this household, the role she had built, refined, and perfected across 10 years of marriage, was to ensure that problems disappeared before her husband ever encountered them. Not because he had asked her to, not because anyone had given her the position, but because she was better at it than anyone else. And because the estate ran on her competence the way a clock ran on its hidden mechanisms, invisibly, reliably, and without credit. She had made peace with that a long time ago. Or she had told herself she had. By noon, she had settled a dispute with 3 tenant farmers who had come to the back door angry about a delayed payment. She had listened to each of them in turn, something Nathaniel's estate manager had apparently not bothered to do, reviewed the records, confirmed that the delay was a clerical error on the manager's side, and arranged correction by the end of the week. The men left satisfied. The manager never knew they had come. By 2 o'clock, she had written Nathaniel's speech for the evening. She had organized 3 years of charitable distributions into a clear summary, every payment, every recipient family, every difficult season where the Whitaker estate had extended credit to struggling farms and asked for nothing in return. She had written it in language that was gracious without being boastful, that honored the workers without embarrassing their employers, that would reflect well on Nathaniel in front of 34 guests who represented the most influential families in the county. She had signed the bottom with his name. She always did. It was simpler that way. She folded the speech, sealed it, and gave it to his valet with instructions to place it in his coat pocket before dinner. Then she went to dress. She sat at the far end of the table. Not beside Nathaniel, he occupied the head, as always, but far enough away that she had a clear line of sight to every face in the room. She had learned, in the years of managing evenings like this, that the most useful position was never the most prominent one. You saw more from the margins. You caught the things the center of the room was too busy performing to notice. Victoria Ashcombe arrived 20 minutes late, Evelyn noticed. She also noticed that Victoria did not apologize for the lateness. She simply appeared in the doorway. At the price limit, the room was full, and every head was already turned in that direction. And she moved to her seat with the unhurried grace of a woman who understood that an entrance only works when therein is an audience for it. Her seat was second from Nathaniel's right. Evelyn had not placed her there. She had reviewed the guest list that morning and placed Victoria near the center of the table, visible enough to feel honored. Far enough from Nathaniel to be appropriate. She looked at the revised arrangement now and understood that someone had changed it. She filed that away without expression. Mrs. Whitaker. Judge Calloway leaned toward her from the adjacent seat. He was 63 years old, had known her father, and was one of perhaps 4 people in the county who spoke to her as though her opinion was worth hearing. Remarkable evening, the food, the flowers, all of it. Thank you. Judge, I heard about the kitchen trouble this morning, he said. My cook's cousin works in your household. Evelyn smiled. It was nothing serious. He looked at her for a moment. Nothing serious, he repeated, quietly enough that no one else heard. You know, Mrs. Whitaker, I've been attending dinners in this county for 40 years. I can always tell when a room has been held together by someone who isn't being given credit for it. She did not look away. You're very kind. I'm very accurate, he said. Then he returned to his wine. Across the table, Victoria was saying something that made Nathaniel laugh a full, shoulder-moving laugh, the kind Evelyn had not heard from him in some time. She watched his face in the candlelight. He was listening to Victoria the way he used to listen to her. Years ago, in the early months, leaning slightly forward. Eyes attentive, as though whatever was being said mattered more than anything else in the room. Evelyn looked down at her plate. She told herself it was nothing. A charming guest, a gracious host. She had told herself many versions of this over the past 3 months. She was becoming less convinced. Nathaniel pushed back his chair. The room quieted the way it always did when he stood, the particular silence of people accustomed to deferring to a man in his own house. He was a commanding figure. She had always known that. He possessed the kind of authority that required no effort, that simply existed in the way he occupied space, and she had admired it once. Before she understood that authority without attention was simply a very expensive form of carelessness. He reached for his wine glass. Evelyn straightened slightly. She had written his speech carefully. She had earned this moment not for herself, not for recognition, but because the work it represented was real. And real work deserved to be spoken about honestly in front of the people who had benefited from it. Ladies and gentlemen, Nathaniel began, his voice carrying easily through the room. This has been a remarkable season for Whitaker Manor. I want to take a moment to acknowledge something this room deserves to hear. Evelyn waited. He turned, not toward her. He turned toward Victoria Ashcombe. And he raised his glass, and he said the words that would take Evelyn the rest of the night to fully comprehend. To the woman whose wisdom has brought peace and elegance back to this household, whose counsel and presence have reminded us what it means to build something worth preserving. To Miss Ashcombe, this estate is richer for knowing you. Victoria lowered her eyes. It was perfectly done. The performance of humility from a woman who had prepared for this moment. The room lifted its glasses. Evelyn did not lift hers. She sat very still, and she felt not anger, not yet. Not the clean burning thing that anger was, but something quieter and much heavier than anger. The sensation of finally understanding something she had been refusing to understand for a very long time. She had corrected his guest list. She had saved his dinner. She had written his speech, and he had not read it. She knew he hadn't read it because nothing he had just said bore any resemblance to what she had written. No mention of the harvest workers. No acknowledgement of the charitable distributions. No record of the 3 years of work she had organized, managed and executed in his name quietly, without complaint, without recognition, and apparently without consequence. He had spoken from his heart, as he would later tell her. His heart, it turned out, was full of Victoria Ashcombe. Margaret Holloway, Nathaniel's aunt, seated to his left. A woman of 62 who had spent her entire life defending the customs of a world that had consistently rewarded her silence, caught Evelyn's eye from across the table and offered a small, composed smile. The smile said, "This is simply how things are." The smile said, "A woman of sense accepts her position." The smile said, "Do not make a scene." Evelyn looked down at the family ledger beside her chair. Leather-bound, brass clasp, at the corners from 10 years of her hands. Every financial decision this estate had made since the week after their wedding was recorded in that book, in her handwriting. Every tenant payment, every charitable disbursement, every harvest negotiation, every crisis managed, and every problem solved, documented with the precision of a woman who understood that if you did not write things down, the world had a remarkable ability to forget they had ever happened. The speech Nathaniel had just given, the one she had not written, had credited the wisdom and elegance of this household to another woman. In front of 34 witnesses, Evelyn reached down. She picked up the ledger. She reached into the pocket of her evening jacket and withdrew the small brass key, the key to the ledger's clasp, which she had carried on her person every single day of their marriage, because Nathaniel had lost the original in the second year, and she had made a replacement and simply never given it up. Because even then, some part of her had understood something she had not been ready to name. She set the key on the table beside his wine glass. She stood. "Mrs. Whitaker," someone began to her left. She did not stop. She leaned toward Nathaniel just enough, just briefly, and spoke in a voice that was absolutely steady, absolutely quiet, and absolutely final. "Since this house has found someone else to trust," she said, "it no longer needs me to protect it." She took the ledger. She walked out. She did not slam the door. She did not raise her voice. She moved through the dining room with the particular composure of a woman who has stopped performing patience and arrived, without drama, at a decision, not in anger, not in grief, but in the cold and clarifying recognition that she had just watched her husband praise another woman for her life's work, in front of every person who mattered in their world, and had felt in that moment not devastation, but something far more dangerous. Certainty. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel say her name. Once, the way a man says a name when he's startled, reflexive, unthinking, rather than the way a man says a name when he is sorry. She kept walking. He came to the estate office 20 minutes later. She heard him in the hallway before the door opened, the particular rhythm of his walk, the slight hesitation outside the door that told her he had stood there for a moment before deciding to enter. She did not look up from the ledger. "Evelyn." His voice carried the specific quality of a man who has not yet decided whether he is angry or embarrassed. "What you did in there, walking out like that in front of everyone." "Yes," she said, turning a page. "I imagine that was uncomfortable. It was humiliating. For both of us." She looked up then. "I walked out of a dinner," she said. "That's what you're describing as humiliating." She held his gaze. "Your wife left the table. Not a servant. Not a guest. Your wife got up and walked out of your dining room, in front of 34 people, because her husband raised a glass to another woman and called it wisdom." She paused. "I want you to consider for just a moment what it took for me to reach that point. I was being gracious to a guest. You were giving her credit for my work." The words fell into the room and stayed there. Nathaniel opened his mouth. "The speech," Evelyn said. "The one I wrote. Did you read it?" He was quiet for 1 second too long. "Your valet had it in your coat by 4 o'clock, she said. "I wrote it myself. 3 years of charitable distributions, organized, summarized, attributed correctly. The workers who kept this harvest running. The tenant families we extended credit to. The actual record of what this estate has done. And who did it." She set the pen down. "Did you read it?" "Nathaniel, did you read it?" "No," he said. "I didn't read it." The silence after that was the loudest thing Evelyn had heard all evening. "You praised her," she said quietly, "for peace and elegance, for wisdom, for things she has had 3 months to perform while I had 10 years of actual work." She stood. "I need you to understand something before you say another word to me tonight." She walked around the desk and faced him directly. "I have managed this household since the week we married. I have protected your reputation, solved your problems, organized your finances, and maintained every relationship that keeps this estate functioning. I have done all of it in your name, without credit, without complaint, and without once suggesting that you owed me recognition for it." Her voice did not waver. "But I am not invisible, I am not decoration. And I am not going to stand at the end of your table while you toast the woman who spent 3 months trying to replace me in a position she has never understood and could not hold for 30 days. Evelyn." "Victoria is not trying to. The ledger has been altered." That stopped him. "I found it tonight," she said. "Entries changed. Amounts redirected. My signature copied onto authorizations I never signed." She watched his face. "Someone has been moving money from the charitable fund. Families in this county who were supposed to receive support have not received it. And the records have been adjusted to suggest that I approved the transfers." Nathaniel's expression shifted, the first genuine shift she had seen from him all evening. Something moving beneath the surface of his composure. Are you certain?" "I am always certain before I speak," she said. "You know that about me. Or you should." He stood very still. "The ledger stays with me," she said. "I will find the original documentation. I will identify every altered entry, and I will trace every redirected payment to wherever it went. And I will do it correctly and completely before I take it anywhere." She moved toward the door. "Your guests are still at dinner. You should go back, Evelyn. We need to talk about this. We will." She stopped in the doorway and looked back at him, this man she had married. This man she had served without resentment for 10 years. This man who had just publicly handed away her work and still did not fully understand what he had done. "But tonight, Nathaniel, I need you to go back to that room and think very carefully about what it means that someone in your household has been falsifying records in my name." She paused. "And think about who in your life has had the access, the motive, and the specific knowledge of my record-keeping habits to do it without being noticed." She let that sit. "Good night," she said. She left. The sitting room off her bedroom was where she went when she needed to think, without being interrupted, a small room that had been designed as a ladies' reading space and that she had quietly converted, over the years, into something closer to a working office. Her books were there, her private correspondence files, and the lockbox bolted to the floor beneath the window that held the copies of every document she had ever produced for this estate. She had started keeping copies in the 3rd year of their marriage. Not out of suspicion, out of habit, out of the simple understanding that records kept by one person, in one place, accessible to anyone with a key, were not really records at all. They were a single point of failure. And she had never been comfortable with single points of failure. She pulled the lockbox from beneath the window and opened it with the key she kept on her person. The documents were there, organized year by category, by transaction type. She pulled out the correspondence files for the charitable fund, 3 years of letters, confirmations, signed receipts from recipient families, cross-referenced against the ledger entries. She spread them across the table and began comparing. The first discrepancy took her 12 minutes to find. The second took 4. By the time she had worked through 2 full years of records, she had found 9 altered entries, 9 payments that the ledger showed as authorized by her signature payments to an account she did not recognize, in amounts that had been carefully calibrated to stay below the threshold she used for secondary review. Whoever had done this had studied her systems. They had understood exactly how she worked, exactly what numbers would trigger a closer look and what numbers would pass through as routine. They had known which entries to change and which to leave alone. They had known where the ledger was kept, how to access it, and how to replicate her handwriting closely enough to pass a casual inspection. This was not opportunistic theft. This was planned. Evelyn sat back and looked at the documents spread across the table, 9 families who had not received what they were owed, and 9 altered entries that pointed directly at her as the person who had redirected the money. She thought about the toast. She thought about the revised seating arrangement she had not approved. She thought about Victoria Ashcombe's perfectly timed arrival, Her carefully performed humility, the 3 months of slow, deliberate insertion into the life of this household, the visits, the suggestions, the gentle positioning of herself as someone whose wisdom and counsel had improved things. And she thought about what it meant that someone had gone to the trouble of not simply stealing from the Whitaker estate, but of stealing in a way that required Evelyn Hartwell to be discredited first. You did not forge a woman's signature if you believed she would be believed over you. You forged it when you had spent 3 months ensuring that she would not be. Evelyn looked at the lamp for a long moment. Then she reached for her pen, opened a clean sheet of paper, and began to write not a letter, not a complaint, not an accusation, a records. Documented, fully sourced, cross-referenced to the originals. The kind of document that did not need a dramatic presentation because the facts were sufficient on their own. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. When she finished, she set the pen down, looked at what she had built, and felt not vindication, not yet, not the earned and final thing that vindication was, but the quiet, steely readiness of a woman who has spent 10 years solving other people's problems and has finally decided to solve her own. The ledger sat on the corner of the table. The brass key sat beside it. She picked up the key. She would not be placing it on anyone's table again. Clara found her at 5 in the morning, not in the bedroom, not in the sitting room, in the estate office at the desk. Surrounded by documents, with the lamp still burning and the ledger open to a page that Clara had never been allowed to touch. "Ma'am," Clara set down the coffee tray without being asked. "You haven't slept." "No," Evelyn said. She did not look up. "Should I close the door, Clara?" Clara closed it. "I need you to sit down." That made Clara pause. In 7 years of working beside Evelyn Hartwell, Clara had never once been asked to sit down in the estate office. She pulled the small chair from against the wall and sat on its edge, hands folded, watching the woman she had served with the particular attention of someone who understood that what happened in the next few minutes was going to matter. Evelyn set her pen down. She looked at Clara directly. "Who has been in this office when I was not present?" she said. "In the last 3 months. I need every name you can give me. And I need you to be precise." Clara did not hesitate. "Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Coles twice, maybe 3 times. About the harvest accounts. Mrs. Holloway once, in September." She said she was looking for the charitable correspondence. She paused. "And 4 times that I saw." 4 times, yes. "Ma'am, 3 times with Mrs. Holloway, once alone." Clara's voice was careful. "Mary let her in. She said Miss Ashcombe told her you given permission." "I gave no such permission." "No," Clara said. "I didn't think you had." The room was quiet for a moment. "Did you see what she did in here?" Evelyn asked. "When she was alone." "She was at the desk," Clara said. "I only saw for a moment through the doorway before Mary closed it. She had the ledger open." She paused again. "I should have told you sooner." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, you're telling me now," Evelyn said. "That's what matters." She picked up the pen and wrote Clara's account down, names, dates, the detail about Mary, the specific mention of the ledger. Then she added it to the stack of documents she had been building since 2 in the morning. "One more thing," she said. "I need you to speak with Thomas before breakfast. I need to know if any correspondence left this estate in the past 3 months that did not go through me, letters, financial documents, anything sent by courier that I did not personally authorize. If Thomas doesn't know, ask the stable boys. Someone drove that courier." "I'll find out," Clara said. "Don't speak to anyone else about this. Not yet, of course not." Clara stood, smoothed her apron and picked up the tray. At the door, she stopped. "Mrs. Whitaker." Evelyn looked up. "Whatever it is," Clara said. "You're going to handle it. You always do." Evelyn held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and returned to the documents. After the door closed, she allowed herself 30 seconds of stillness, not weakness, not despair, but the necessary pause of a woman recalibrating in the face of something larger than she had anticipated. She had gone into last night expecting a wound. She had found a trap. That changed things considerably. She picked up her pen and kept writing. Nathaniel came down at 7. She heard him in the hallway, the particular weight of his footsteps. Slower than usual, which told her he had not slept well either. She heard him stop outside the office door, a long pause. Then he knocked. "Come in," she said. He looked like a man who had spent the night sitting with something uncomfortable. His jacket was absent, his collar open, and there was a quality to his expression that she had not seen from him in a long time, not quite humility. Not yet, but the precursor to it. The look of a man who has begun to suspect he has misunderstood something important. "You worked through the night," he said. "Yes, Evelyn." He came into the room and stopped in front of the desk. "What you told me last night about the ledger, about the altered entries." He paused. "I've been thinking about it." "Good," she said. She had not expected that. She looked at him for a moment, long enough to determine that he was not performing concern, that the look on his face was genuine, and then she turned the ledger to face him and placed the first comparison document beside it. "This entry," she said, pointing, "shows a payment of $80 authorized by my signature to an account I have never opened and cannot identify. The original entry here, in my files, shows the same payment directed to the Caldwell family, who farm the South Quarter and who had a failed crop this spring." She moved her finger to the next page. "This entry, $60. The original shows the Mercer family, who lost their barn in July." She looked up at him. 9 entries, Nathaniel. Over 8 months. $430 total. Redirected from families in this county who were depending on it. Nathaniel stared at the documents. "And the signature," he said. "Close enough to pass a quick review," she said. "Not close enough to pass mine." He was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria," he said. It was not a question. It came out of him the way things come out when a man has been resisting a conclusion all night and has finally run out of resistance. "I don't have documentary proof yet that names her specifically," Evelyn said. "What I have is 9 altered entries, a confirmed account that is not connected to this estate, and the information that she was in this office alone, with the ledger at least once in the past 3 months. With access she was not given by me." Nathaniel sat down in the chair across the desk. He sat like a man whose legs had simply decided the conversation required it. "I brought her here," he said. "Yes, I gave her access to this household. Yes, and I stood in front of 34 people last night." And he stopped. He pressed his hand against his mouth for a moment and looked at the documents on the desk. "Evelyn, I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," she said. Her voice was not soft, but it was not cruel either. "That's not the problem I'm asking you to address right now. The problem I'm asking you to address is that families need to be made whole. Whatever was redirected from this fund needs to go to the people it was intended for. That is the immediate issue." "Yes," he straightened. "Yes, of course, I'll have Coles." "No," she said. He looked at her. "You will not have Mr. Coles do anything involving these accounts until I have determined whether Mr. Coles is aware of what has been happening," she said. "He had access to this office. He handled the financial correspondence. I am not accusing him of anything, but I am not allowing him access to these documents until I know what he does and does not know." Nathaniel stared at her. "All right," he said quietly. "What do you need me to do?" It was. She thought. Possibly the first time in years he had asked her that question and genuinely meant it. "I need you to do nothing today," she said. "No conversations with Victoria. No conversations with your aunt. No indication to anyone in this household that anything has changed since last night beyond the fact that your wife left dinner early." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "Then go have breakfast. Act like yourself." She turned back to her documents. "I'll come to you when I have everything I need." He stood. He moved toward the door. "He's Evelyn." She looked up. He was not a man who found words easily when they mattered. She had known that about him since the beginning, the way he retreated into authority and action when the situation required something softer, something more honest. She had thought, once that she could be patient enough for both of them. "I'm sorry," he said, "for last night. For the toast." "I should have. I didn't think about what it would." "I know," she said. "That's not an excuse." "It isn't." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and left. She looked at the closed door for exactly 3 seconds. Then she returned to work. Margaret Holloway arrived at the office at 10 o'clock without knocking. That, in itself, told Evelyn everything she needed to know about the conversation that was coming. Margaret was 62 years old, the daughter of a Virginia senator, and a woman who had spent her entire life operating through the language of propriety while pursuing objectives that were anything but proper. She had never liked Evelyn, not openly, not in any way that could be named or confronted, but in the consistent, subtle manner of a woman who resented another woman's competence while being entirely dependent on its results. She sat in the chair Nathaniel had vacated and folded her hands in her lap. "I think," Margaret said, "that we should discuss last night." "I'm sure you do," Evelyn said. She did not close the ledger. She did not stop working. What you did was noticed by everyone in that room. Evelyn, walking out in the middle of dinner. The impression it created was accurate, Evelyn said. Margaret paused. "I beg your pardon?" "The impression she'd created was accurate." Evelyn set her pen down and looked at her directly. "My husband praised another woman for my work in front of 34 guests. I left the table. Those two things are connected, and the impression they created reflects exactly what happened." "I don't see a problem with that." "The problem," Margaret said, and her voice sharpened slightly, "is that you embarrassed Nathaniel in front of the most important families in this county. Whatever private grievances you may have about how he chose to phrase a toast," Evelyn repeated. "There are appropriate ways to address them, between a husband and wife. Privately, not by making a spectacle of yourself." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "you were in this office in September. You told Mary you were looking for charitable correspondence. The shift was immediate." Not dramatic, Margaret was too composed for drama, but visible. A slight stillness, a recalibration behind the eyes. "I was," Margaret said. "I needed to review a letter regarding the county relief fund. Did you find it?" "I did." "Yes. And did you come alone, or did you bring someone with you?" A pause. "Brief, but there, I may have had Victoria with me," Margaret said. "She's been helping me review the estate's charitable commitments. She has a great deal of experience with philanthropic administration through her father's offices. And I thought her perspective would be—" "You brought her into my office," Evelyn said, "to review documents that are under my management. Without asking me. I didn't think you would object. You didn't think I would find out," Evelyn said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Those are very different things, Mrs. Holloway, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't confuse them in my presence." Margaret's composure cracked slightly, not broke, but cracked the way expensive china shows the line of stress before it splits. "I think," Margaret said, "that you are making a great deal out of a social embarrassment and a few clerical matters. Victoria is a good woman from an excellent family, and she has been a positive influence on this household. If your pride has been wounded by Nathaniel's friendship with her, that is an understandable feeling, but it does not give you the right to." 9 altered ledger entries, Evelyn said. Silence. $430 redirected from the charitable fund, Evelyn continued. Families in this county who have not received support they were owed. My signature forged on authorizations I never signed. And an account that receives the redirected funds that is not connected to this estate in any way I have been able to identify. She folded her hands on the desk. "Is there anything you would like to tell me about that, Mrs. Holloway, before I take this to the circuit court?" Margaret did not move. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. But her voice had changed, flattened, become careful in the way a voice becomes careful when it is editing itself in real time. "You don't have to know what I'm talking about today," Evelyn said pleasantly. "But I would suggest that if there is anything you know about how those entries came to be altered, You give some thought to whether you would prefer to address it privately or publicly. She picked up her pen. I find the judicial system in this county to be thorough. In my experience, Judge Calloway especially, Margaret stood. She was not a woman who retreated, but she was leaving, which was close enough. You are making a very serious mistake, Margaret said at the door. I make very few mistakes, Evelyn said, and I correct the ones I make. You might want to bear that in mind. The door closed. Evelyn looked at it for a moment, then added a new section to the document she was building. Margaret Holloway. September. Victoria present, access to correspondence files, and continued writing. Clara came back at noon. She closed the door behind her, pulled the small chair close to the desk, and lowered her voice, even though there was no one else in the room. Thomas found it, she said. Evelyn set down her pen. 3 couriers in the past 4 months, Clara said. All sent on days when you were away from the estate, the charity committee meetings in Fredericksburg. The 2 trips to Richmond. Letters sent from the estate. Authorized by. She hesitated by a note signed in your name. Which courier service? Not the regular one. A private writer, young man from town. Thomas says he doesn't know him well. Paid in cash each time. Letter sealed, no return information. And Thomas remembered this. Thomas remembers everything he thinks might be important someday, Clara said with the small, dry precision of someone who had worked alongside the man for years. He didn't know why it mattered. He just kept the dates. Evelyn looked at the dates Clara gave her and compared them against her own calendar, the precise record she kept of her movements, her absence, her appointments, every day of every month. Because 10 years of managing a complex estate had required her to account for her time in detail she could defend. The couriers had been sent on her absence days, every single one. She watched my schedule, Evelyn said. Not outrage, just recognition. The flat and clarifying recognition of understanding the full shape of something at last. Ma'am, she waited until I was away. She used my name. She used letters that looked like mine. Evelyn laid the dates against the ledger entries. 3 of the 9 altered entries corresponded to the courier dates. She wasn't improvising. She planned this. She looked at Clara. Someone told her my schedule. Someone in this household who knew when I would be absent and for how long. Clara was quiet. I'm not asking you to name someone right now, Evelyn said. I'm asking you to think about who in this house knew my travel schedule in advance. Who would have had both the access and the reason. Clara's expression tightened. Mrs. Holloway keeps the household calendar, Clara said quietly. She has since before you came to this estate. She never gave it up when you took over the management. You let her keep it because it seemed harmless, Evelyn said. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn was silent for a moment. Then she said, Clara, what do you know about the account that the redirected payments went to? Nothing yet, Clara said. But Thomas's brother-in-law works at the county bank. Thomas thinks, Evelyn said carefully, that I would be very grateful if his brother-in-law happened to notice, in the ordinary course of his work, whether any account opened in the past year is associated with a name connected to the Ashcombe family or to any property they hold. She paused. Tell him I would be equally grateful if that information came to me before it went anywhere else. Clara nodded. One more thing, Evelyn said. She reached into the stack of documents and pulled out a sealed letter she had written before dawn. This needs to go to Judge Calloway today, not through the regular household post. Directly by hand from someone you trust. I'll take it myself, Clara said. Evelyn handed it over. Clara stood, took the letter, and moved to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. Victoria Ashcombe is in the front parlor, she said. She arrived half an hour ago. She's waiting to see you. Evelyn looked up. Is she said. She told Mrs. Holloway she wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding last night. The word misunderstanding landed in the room with a particular kind of weight, the weight of a word chosen not to describe a situation accurately but to contain it, diminish it, reduce something deliberate to something accidental. "Tell Miss Ashcombe," Evelyn said, "that I will be with her shortly." Clara left. Evelyn sat for a moment, with the documents around her, the 9 entries. The courier dates, the account information she was still tracing, the record she had spent 14 hours building. She looked at all of it, the way she looked at a finished account ledger before she closed it. Checking for errors, confirming the totals, ensuring that everything was in the place it needed to be. Then she stood, she smoothed her dress. She walked to the mirror on the far wall and looked at herself, looked at the woman who had not slept, who had worked through the night, who was about to walk into a parlor and have a conversation with the person who had spent 3 months dismantling her life from the inside. She looked composed. She always looked composed. She was going to need more than that today. She straightened her shoulders, turned from the mirror, and walked toward the parlor. Victoria Ashcombe was standing when Evelyn entered, standing near the window, arranged in the specific way of a woman who knows she is being looked at and has positioned herself accordingly. She was dressed simply, which Evelyn recognized immediately as a choice. Simplicity was its own performance when worn by a woman like Victoria. Mrs. Whittaker. She stepped forward, her expression was warm, concerned and precisely calibrated. "I'm so glad you're receiving me. I was worried after last night. I hope you understand that I had no intention of causing any discomfort. I think perhaps the toast was well. These things can be misinterpreted. And I would hate for there to be any—" "Sit down." Miss Ashcombe. Victoria sat. Evelyn remained standing. She did not sit. She did not offer tea. She did not perform hospitality. Because this was not a social call, and she was not going to pretend it was. "I appreciate you coming," Evelyn said. "It saves me the trouble of sending for you." Something moved across Victoria's face, quick, gone almost immediately, replaced by the expression of polite concern. But Evelyn had spent 10 years reading rooms, and the people in them. And she caught it. "I've spent the night reviewing the family ledger," Evelyn said, "and the charitable fund correspondence, and the household calendar for the past 8 months. She watched Victoria's hands, which were folded in her lap with great stillness. "I've found some things that concern me." Victoria's voice was gentle. "Careful. What sort of things?" "Altered entries," Evelyn said. "Redirected payments. A number of authorizations that carry my signature but that I did not sign." She tilted her head slightly. "You have beautiful penmanship, Miss Ashcombe. Your father's letters, which I've seen in our county correspondence files, are always so elegant." Victoria looked at her. For the first time since she had entered the room, she did not immediately respond. "I also have the dates of 3 private courier dispatches," Evelyn continued, "sent from this estate in my name on days when I was absent. And I have a preliminary identification of the account that received the redirected charitable funds." She paused. "I'm still confirming the name attached to that account. I expect to have it confirmed by tomorrow." The room was very quiet. "I didn't come here to accuse you today," Evelyn said. "I came here to tell you what I know, because I believe in giving people the opportunity to respond before I take things further." She kept her voice entirely level. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me?" Victoria looked at her for a long moment. And then something shifted, not dramatically, not the way it shifted in stories where villains collapsed under pressure, but in the small, precise way of a very intelligent woman recalculating her position in real time. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that you may have found some administrative errors that I would be very happy to help clarify." "Administrative errors," Evelyn said. "I've been assisting Mrs. Holloway with the charitable correspondence. It's possible some entries were transcribed incorrectly in the process. I certainly never intended." "The account that received the redirected funds," Evelyn said. "Is it yours?" Victoria met her eyes. "I don't know what account you're referring to," she said. "Then you have nothing to worry about," Evelyn said pleasantly. "When the confirmation comes through tomorrow, it won't carry your name. And this conversation will have been entirely unnecessary." She moved toward the door and opened it. "Thank you for coming, Miss Ashcombe. I'll see you out." Victoria stood slowly. She walked and stopped, just beside Evelyn, close enough that Evelyn could see the careful composure it was costing her to maintain the performance. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said quietly, so that only Evelyn could hear. "I think you are a very capable woman, and I think that capability has been wasted for a very long time in a household that does not appreciate it." A pause. "I also think that what you're suggesting is a very serious accusation." "And that Nathaniel is aware," Evelyn said. "He has been since 7 this morning, that landed." "I would suggest," Evelyn continued, still pleasantly, still quietly, "that before tomorrow, you speak with whoever advised you on the structure of those redirected accounts. Because whatever they told you about how well it was hidden, they were wrong." Victoria left. Evelyn closed the door. She stood alone in the empty parlor for a moment. Then she exhaled not relief, not triumph, but the specific release of a woman who has held herself together at the exact level of tension required, and is now allowing herself, briefly, to feel the weight of what she is carrying. $430. 9 families. 8 months of deliberate, careful, expertly executed theft conducted behind the shield of Evelyn's own name. Using Evelyn's own systems, exploiting the invisibility that Evelyn had built and maintained, and she could see this clearly now that someone had studied and weaponized. They had not simply stolen from the charitable fund. They had stolen from it in a way that required Evelyn to be discredited first. The 3 months of social positioning, the growing influence over Nathaniel. The toast the public witnessed, 34-person toast, that placed another woman's name on Evelyn's work on the record. In front of everyone who mattered. You did not set up that kind of frame unless you were planning to need it. She walked back to the estate office. She sat at the desk. She pulled the documents back in front of her and added the notes from the conversation with Victoria specific, exact, word for word, and added them to the record. Then she pulled a fresh sheet of paper and began drafting the formal request she would send to the circuit court. Not an accusation. Not yet. A request for a review of the charitable fund accounts associated with Whitaker Manor, conducted by the county in the presence of both the estate management and any interested parties. Clean, official, unassailable. The kind of document that did not require drama because the facts were doing all the necessary work. She wrote until the lamp needed refilling. She refilled it herself and kept writing. Outside the window, the Whitaker estate went about its afternoon. The farms, the fields, the households of the tenant families who did not yet know that money had been taken from them, that their names had been borrowed and their hardships exploited by someone who had sat in Evelyn's office with her ledger open. They were going to find out, not from a scandal, not from a public spectacle, from a precise, documented, legally submitted account that named every altered entry, traced every redirected dollar, and made it absolutely impossible for anyone, Nathaniel, Margaret, Victoria, or the circuit court to look at what had happened and suggest it was a misunderstanding. Evelyn Hartwell had been invisible for 10 years. She was done with that now. The letter from Judge Calloway arrived 2 days later. Not a formal response. A personal one, 3 lines. Written in his own hand, delivered by his private clerk rather than the county post. Mrs. Whitaker, I received your documentation. I have reviewed the preliminary materials you provided. I believe a formal gathering is warranted. I will arrange it. Please be ready within the week. Evelyn read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in the lockbox beneath the window, and went to find Nathaniel. He was in the front study, not working. Just sitting, which was unusual enough that she noticed it immediately. He had a glass of bourbon on the table beside him that appeared untouched. He looked like a man who had been sitting with his own thoughts for long enough that the thoughts had stopped being comfortable. He looked up when she entered. Judge Calloway is convening a formal review, she said. End of the week. Nathaniel sat forward. Here. It's the most appropriate venue. The documents are here. The relevant parties are here. She paused. And I want it on record that this household initiated the review. not responded to one. He was quiet for a moment. Victoria will know what's coming. Yes, Evelyn said. She will, and my aunt will also know. She looked at him steadily. That's not a reason to avoid it, Nathaniel. That's a reason to be prepared. He stood up, crossed the room, stopped in front of her with the particular stillness of a man who is trying to find words for something he has not had to articulate before. I owe you more than an apology. Yes, she agreed. You do. But we can address that after Thursday. She left him standing in the study and went back to work. The next 3 days were the quietest Whitaker Manor had seen in months, the specific quiet of a house holding its breath. Victoria did not leave. That surprised Evelyn, and she noted it carefully. A guilty woman would have manufactured a reason to return to her father's house. To create distance, to put geography between herself and whatever was coming. Victoria remained. She appeared at meals. She spoke to Nathaniel with the same practiced warmth. She was performing normalcy with the discipline of someone who understood that leaving would be its own confession. She was also, Evelyn suspected, removing things. On the second morning, Clara came to the estate office with a look on her face that Evelyn had learned to read over 7 years, not alarm. Not quite, but the expression of a woman who has seen something she cannot explain and has come to the only person she trusts to explain it. Mary found a burned bundle in the rear garden, Clara said. Late last night. She thought it was garden refuse at first. But some of it didn't burn completely. She placed a small folded cloth on the desk. Inside it were 3 scorched fragments of paper, not much. Just edges, just corners, but enough to show the column format of financial correspondence and, on one fragment, the bottom quarter of what appeared to be a signature. Evelyn looked at the fragments without touching them. She's destroying the copies she kept, Evelyn said. It looks that way, ma'am. Good. She looked up at Clara's expression of confusion. If she's burning her copies, it means she doesn't know I have mine. It means she thinks the altered entries in the ledger are the primary record. She carefully folded the cloth back around the fragments. These go in the lockbox exactly as they are. Clara took them. She's frightened, she said. She should be, Evelyn said. Then after a pause, but she's also still thinking. Which means she's going to do something else before Thursday. Watch her. Clara nodded and left. Evelyn sat back and considered. A woman who was simply guilty of opportunistic theft might panic and flee. But Victoria Ashcombe was not simply guilty of opportunistic theft. And she had not built a 3-month strategy for taking over the financial management of a wealthy estate by being a woman who panicked. She would pivot. She would find a new position. She would attempt to reframe what was coming before it arrived. The question was how. Evelyn did not have to wait long to find out. Margaret came to her that afternoon. Not with the composed authority she had worn to their first confrontation. Margaret came quietly, which was more unsettling than any amount of social armoring would have been. And she sat in the chair across the desk and folded her hands and looked at Evelyn with an expression that contained, beneath its surface, something that Evelyn had never once seen on Margaret Holloway's face in 10 years. Fear. She told me it was an administrative error, Margaret said. When I asked her about the accounts, Evelyn looked at her. When did you ask her? Yesterday. Margaret's voice was careful, measured, but there was a tremor in it that she was working to control. After Nathaniel told me about the review, I went to her directly. I asked her to explain it to me. A pause. She told me the entries were a clerical matter that had been mishandled by the estate's financial manager. She said you had misread the records. Did you believe her? The question hung in the room. Margaret looked at her hands. I have known Victoria Ashcombe for 4 years, she said. I introduced her to this household. I encouraged the friendship with Nathaniel because I believed she stopped. I believed she was a woman of character, Mrs. Holloway. Evelyn's voice was not unkind. Did you know about the altered entries? At the time they were being made? No, firm. Immediate. I gave her access to this office. I gave her access to the correspondence files. I told her where things were kept and how the records were organized because she asked and I saw no reason not to tell her. She looked up, and there was something raw in her expression, not guilt exactly, but the specific anguish of understanding how you were used. I thought she was interested in learning how an estate of this size was managed. I thought she admired the work. She was learning the systems, Evelyn said, so she could work around them. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. I know, you gave her my schedule, Evelyn said. The household calendar. She asked to see it. Margaret's voice was flat now, stripped of its usual authority. She said she wanted to coordinate her visits with times that would be least disruptive. I never imagined that she would use it to. She stopped again. The couriers were sent on my absence days, Evelyn said. Every one of them. Whoever timed those dispatches needed to know exactly when I would be away and for how long. Margaret sat with that. I'm going to ask you something, Evelyn said, and I need you to answer me honestly. Not for my sake. For the sake of 9 families in this county who did not receive money that was meant for them. She held Margaret's gaze. Is there anything else you gave her access to? Any documents? Any correspondence, any information about this estate's finances or charitable work that you provided to Victoria Ashcombe that I should know about before Thursday? The silence lasted long enough that Evelyn began to count it. The charitable grant applications, Margaret said finally. From 2 years ago. She asked to see how the applications were structured. She said she was advising her father's political office on charitable programs and wanted to understand how a private estate handled distributions. She exhaled slowly. I gave her the originals to review. For 2 days, Evelyn said. Yes. Long enough to identify the recipient families by name and address. Yes, Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. Long enough for that. Evelyn looked at her desk at the documents she had built over 3 days. The careful, meticulous record that now had another layer to add to it. She picked up her pen. I'm going to need a written statement from you, she said. Everything you've told me just now. Date specific items. The conversations as closely as you remember them. I need it in your handwriting, signed before Thursday morning. Margaret looked up. If you do that, Evelyn said, the record reflects that you came forward voluntarily with information that assisted the review. That is a very different position than the one you'd be in if this came out during the formal proceedings. She looked at her steadily. I'm not offering you protection, I can't, but I can ensure that the record accurately reflects the difference between someone who was deceived and someone who participated. Margaret stood. She looked older than she had 3 days ago, not physically, but in the way a person looks older when they have been forced to understand something about their own judgment that they would have preferred not to know. I'll have it to you by morning, she said. Thank you, Evelyn said. After Margaret left, Evelyn put down her pen and sat for a moment with the particular weight of what had just happened, not satisfaction. Not vindication, but the heavy, complicated recognition that the people who had enabled the damage were not always the people who had intended it. Margaret had been used. Margaret had also been careless and proud, and too invested in her own social maneuvering to question the motives of a woman who was flattering her while picking her pockets. But she had not known. Evelyn added that to the record too. Wednesday evening, Nathaniel came to the estate office for the 3rd time since the dinner. He had developed a habit of knocking, which was new. Evelyn noted it without commenting on it. Victoria asked to speak with me this afternoon, he said. Evelyn looked up, and I told her I wasn't available. He came into the room and stood near the window, not at the desk. Not in the chair, but at a distance that was respectful of the space she was working in. That was also new. She left a note for me. I thought you should see it. He placed the note on the edge of the desk, far enough away that she would have to choose to pick it up rather than having it placed in front of her. She picked it up. The note was 2 paragraphs. The first expressed Victoria's deep regret about any distress the events of recent days had caused. The second made a careful, graceful suggestion that the errors in the charitable accounts were the result of miscommunication between herself and Mr. Coles, the estate's financial manager, and that a private resolution would be in everyone's best interest, particularly given the sensitivity of the Whitaker family's position in the county. Evelyn read it twice. Then she set it down. "She's offering to make Mr. Coles the responsible party," she said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "That's what I understood. And she's suggesting that a public review would embarrass the family, yes." Evelyn looked at him. "What did you think when you read it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I thought it was the move of a woman who is running out of options and is trying to find one that lets her walk away without consequence." He paused. "And I thought about Cole's 22 years with this estate. Never a question against him, and I felt sick." "Good," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "The fact that makes you feel sick," she said, "means you understand what's actually happening. That's important for tomorrow." She set the note beside her other documents. "She's going to try this again in the formal setting. She'll have a version of this prepared, something that introduces confusion, that spreads responsibility, that makes the picture complicated enough that a clean resolution becomes difficult." She looked at him steadily. "That's why the documentation has to be complete. Every altered entry sourced. Every redirected payment traced, every date cross-referenced. She cannot confuse what is clearly and completely documented." "Is it?" he asked. "As of an hour ago," she said. "Yes," he exhaled. "Nathaniel, tomorrow you do not defend me. You do not explain me. You do not attempt to manage the room on my behalf." She held his gaze. "I will present the documentation. I will answer the questions. This has to come from me directly, or it will always look like something you are managing rather than something I am proving." A pause. "Can you let me do that?" He looked at her for a long moment. It was not a comfortable look. There was something in it that she recognized as the specific discomfort of a man understanding, for the first time, the full scope of what he had not been seeing. "Yes," he said, "I can do that. Thank you." He moved toward the door. "Stopped Evelyn. The 9 families. The payments that were redirected." He turned back to face her. "I want to make them whole before Thursday, not as part of the proceedings. Before, so that it's done regardless of what happens tomorrow." She looked at him. "I've already calculated the amounts," she said. "I'll have the figures for you in the morning." Something shifted in his expression, relief. And beneath it, something older and less comfortable. "I should have been paying this kind of attention all along," he said. "Yes," she said, "you should have." She returned to her work. He left, and the manor settled into its last night of the particular quiet that precedes a reckoning. Thursday morning came in cold and clear. By 9 o'clock, Judge Calloway was at the manor with his clerk, 2 members of the County Oversight Committee, and a representative from the Virginia Charitable Administration Office, a detail Evelyn had specifically requested in her initial letter, because she wanted a state-level witness present for what was going to be placed on the record. Victoria arrived at the formal parlor at 9:15 with her father's personal attorney, a development that to exactly no one, and that Evelyn had anticipated well enough to have already provided Judge Calloway with a copy of. Every document in her possession the previous evening, delivered personally by Clara's hand. Margaret took her seat at the far end of the gathering and said nothing. Nathaniel sat to Evelyn's left and said nothing as agreed. Evelyn set the family ledger on the table. She set the original documentation beside it, the cross-referenced entries, the courier records, the burned fragments recovered from the garden, the confirmation letters from recipient families, and Margaret's written statement, signed and dated that morning. She set all of it on the table, organized in the order she would present it, and she looked at the room. Judge Calloway looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Whitaker, you may begin, Judge." She did not stand. She spoke from her seat clearly and directly, without preamble. "I am presenting documentation of 9 instances of fraudulent alteration to the Whitaker Estates Charitable Fund ledger, resulting in the redirection of $430 from 9 recipient families to a private account not associated with this estate. I am also presenting evidence indicating that 3 private courier dispatches were sent from this estate, authorized by a forged version of my signature, on dates corresponding to my scheduled absences from the property. She heard Victoria's attorney begin to speak. Judge Calloway raised one hand without looking away from Evelyn. The attorney stopped. The documentation will show, Evelyn continued. The original ledger entries in my handwriting, the altered entries as they now appear in the ledger, and the cross-referenced confirmation records from recipient families that establish the original amounts and intended recipients. She placed her hand on the ledger. I would also note for the record that the family ledger remained on the premises of Whitaker Manor at all times, that I have documented evidence of unauthorized access to the estate office in which the ledger was kept, and that the account to which the redirected funds were sent was identified by the county bank as opened 11 months ago under the name of a property holding associated with the Ashcombe family. That was the moment the room changed. Not dramatically, not in the way rooms changed in stories, with gasps and sudden movements. It changed the way rooms changed in reality, when something that has been carefully avoided is plainly, and everyone present must decide, in the space of a heartbeat, how they are going to respond. Victoria's attorney leaned toward his client. Evelyn did not look at them. She kept her eyes on Judge Calloway, whose expression had settled into the particular focused gravity of a man who has been doing this long enough to recognize the difference between a prepared accusation and documented truth. Mrs. Whitaker, he said carefully, the account you have identified, you have the bank's confirmation of the associated name. I do. She produced it from the stack and handed it to his clerk. The clerk passed it to the judge. He read it. He set it down with the precise, contained movement of a man controlling his reaction. Miss Ashcombe. He looked across the table. Your representative may respond. Victoria's attorney stood. He was a composed man, clearly experienced, and he had prepared something. Evelyn could see it in the way he arranged himself. The particular confidence of someone who believes they have a viable counter-argument. The account in question, he began, is a philanthropic holding established by the Ashcombe family for the purpose of supporting charitable initiatives in the Virginia County region. The transfers indicated in Mrs. Whitaker's documentation were made as part of a coordinated charitable effort between the Ashcombe Foundation and the Whitaker estate, an arrangement that Mrs. Whitaker, as estate manager, may not have been fully informed of given the nature of. The authorizations carry my forged signature, Evelyn said. Her voice was entirely level. The attorney paused. They carry a signature, he said carefully, that was executed by someone with the authority to. I have the originals, Evelyn said. Every original entry I made in that ledger, from the past 3 years, stored separately in a private lockbox to which only I have ever held a key. She looked at him directly. The altered entries do not match my handwriting when compared to the originals. I have provided this comparison to Judge Calloway. I would invite the County Oversight Committee to conduct their own comparison. She paused. I would also note that the recipients of the 9 original payments, the Caldwell family, the Mercer family, and 7 others have confirmed in writing that they did not receive the funds recorded in the altered entries. Those confirmation letters are in the documentation before you. The attorney sat down. Silence. Judge Calloway looked at Victoria. She was sitting with the composure of a woman who had prepared for many versions of this moment and was now rapidly sorting through them, looking for the one that still applied. Evelyn watched her and understood. In that moment, something she had not quite articulated to herself before, that Victoria Ashcombe was genuinely intelligent, genuinely capable, and had genuinely wasted both of those qualities on this. Miss Ashcombe, Judge Calloway said, is there anything you wish to say at this time? Victoria looked at him. Then she looked at Evelyn, and Evelyn saw at the precise moment when a person who has been performing confidence decides to stop. Not defeat, not remorse, but the practical recognition of a woman calculating the cost of continuing to fight against documented evidence in front of a judge. 2 county officials and a state representative. "I would like to consult with my attorney privately," Victoria said. "You may do so," Judge Calloway said. "You have 15 minutes." They left the room. The state representative leaned forward and spoke quietly to the judge. The county officials reviewed documents. Margaret sat at the end of the table with her hands folded and her eyes on the table surface and did not speak. Nathaniel leaned slightly toward Evelyn. "You didn't raise your voice once," he said. "Low enough for only her to hear." "I didn't need to," she said. He looked at the ledger on the table. "Those families," he said. "The payments went out this morning. Every one of them. She had known he would do it. She had calculated for it, but hearing it said out loud, in this room, after everything the past 4 days had been, produced something in her chest that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude, but something that combined both and was larger than either. "Good," she said quietly. They did not speak again before Victoria and her attorney returned. What followed was not a dramatic confession. It was not the clean, cathartic moment that stories sometimes promise, the moment where the guilty party breaks and admits everything in terms that leave no ambiguity. What it was instead was a negotiation. Victoria's attorney presented a proposal. Full restitution of the redirected funds, though Nathaniel had already made the families whole, which Evelyn noted for the record voluntary withdrawal from any further involvement with the Whitaker estate, and a formal acknowledgement that the entries in question had been made in error. No admission of forgery, no admission of intent. Judge Calloway looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "the formal petition for fraud charges remains your right to pursue through the circuit court. What is your position?" The room was very still. Evelyn looked at the documentation before her. She thought about the 9 families, the Caldwells, the Mercers, the others who had their money now, who did not need a public trial to receive what they had been owed. She thought about the formal record that existed now, signed by Judge Calloway, witnessed by the county officials and the state representative, documenting exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it. She thought about what a trial would cost in time, in exposure, in the specific kind of public spectacle that ground people down regardless of the outcome. She thought about what she actually wanted, not revenge, not spectacle, not the satisfaction of watching a guilty woman humiliated in a courtroom. What she wanted was the record, the clear, unambiguous, officially witnessed record that said, "This happened. This is what it was, and this is who was responsible." She had that. The circuit court petition, she said, will be filed and maintained as a matter of record. Whether it proceeds to trial will depend on full compliance with the terms of restitution and withdrawal. She looked at Victoria's attorney. "If there is any further contact with this estate's accounts, its personnel, or its charitable operations by Miss Ashcombe, or by any party acting on her behalf, the petition proceeds without further discussion." The attorney nodded. "Miss Ashcombe." Evelyn looked at her directly. "One more thing. For the record." Victoria met her eyes. "The wisdom and elegance that were toasted at my dinner table last Saturday," Evelyn said, "without heat, without cruelty, with the flat and absolute calm of a woman stating a fact, did not belong to you. It never did, and the people in that room now know that. The people in this room know that." She paused. "That is all I needed." Victoria said nothing. Judge Calloway closed the formal proceedings at 11:42. The county officials gathered their papers. The state representative spoke briefly with the judge, and then with Evelyn, confirming that the state-level documentation would reflect the voluntary remediation and the formal record. Margaret left without speaking to anyone. Victoria and her attorney left without looking at Nathaniel. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms empty after something significant, not all at once, but in the gradual dispersal of people who need a moment to absorb what they have just witnessed before they can re-enter the ordinary world. Evelyn sat at the table after everyone had gone. The ledger was still in front of her. She looked at it, the worn leather cover, the brass clasp, the accumulated weight of 10 years of her handwriting between its pages. She thought about the morning she had brought it to this table, and the decision that had led her here, and the 4 days between then and now that had cost her more than she had let anyone see. She picked up the ledger. She was still holding it when Nathaniel came back into the room. He had walked the judge and the county officials out. He came back alone, crossed to where she was sitting, and stood on the other side of the table in the empty room. He did not say anything for a long moment. "She was going to let them blame you," he said finally. She had it arranged so that when it was discovered, and she knew it would be discovered, eventually it would point directly at you. "Yes," Evelyn said. "And the toast, that night. Part of it," she said. "Or it became part of it. I'm not certain whether she planned the toast specifically or simply used the opportunity. It doesn't change the function it served." She looked at him. A woman who had been publicly passed over in favor of someone else. At her own dinner table, in front of everyone, a woman in that position who then accused the other woman of financial fraud. She let the logic of it settle. Who would have been believed? Nathaniel looked like a man who had just understood something that he wished he had understood 3 months earlier. "I was the mechanism," he said. "You were careless," she said. "There's a difference. She used your carelessness. That's not the same as being complicit." She paused. "But it is something you need to sit with." "I know," he said. She stood. She held the ledger under her arm the way she had held it when she walked out of the dining room 4 days ago, which felt now like something that had happened in another life. "The estate needs to function tomorrow," she said. "The tenants need their accounts reviewed. The winter charitable applications will be coming in from the county next month, and I need the fund documentation corrected and properly filed with the state office before then." She looked at him steadily. "I have a great deal of work to do, I know," he said. "And I will do it," she said, "but I will do it as myself, with my name on it and my authority behind it and my signature on every document that requires one." She held his gaze. "Not in the background, not invisibly, not in a way that can be handed to someone else and toasted at a dinner party." "Yes," he said. And then quietly, "Evelyn, I am sorry, not for last night or last week. For years of not seeing what was in front of me." She looked at him for a long moment. She did not say "it's all right," because it wasn't. Not entirely. And she had never been a woman who said things that weren't true for the sake of comfort. She said, "I know." Then she walked out of the room, through the hallway, past the dining room, where 4 days ago she had placed a brass key on a table and decided something, and into the estate office where the work was waiting. She sat down. She opened the ledger to the first of the entries she would need to correct. And she began. The corrections took 4 days. Not because the work was beyond her, she had done harder accounting in worse conditions, but because Evelyn refused to rush it. Every altered entry had to be restored to its original form, annotated with the date of correction and the reason, and countersigned by both herself and Judge Calloway's clerk, who came to the manor on Friday morning with the official county seal and the patience of a man who had learned, in 30 years of legal work, that some documents needed to be done exactly right regardless of how long it took. She worked at the estate office desk from 7 in the morning until the light failed each evening. Nathaniel brought her coffee on the second morning. Not Clara. Nathaniel himself, carrying the tray with the careful attention of a man who is doing something unfamiliar and does not want to do it badly. He set it on the corner of the desk where it would not disturb her papers. He did not speak. He left without being asked to. She looked at the tray for a moment after he was gone. Then she picked up her pen and kept working. On the third day, Mr. Coles came to the office. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, a posture Evelyn had never seen from him before. Because Coles was a man who had managed the Whitaker estate's financial correspondence for 22 years and had always carried himself with the settled authority of someone who knew his position was secure. He did not look settled now. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "Come in," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He turned his hat in his hands twice before he spoke. "I knew something was wrong," he said. 3 months ago. I noticed a discrepancy in the charitable account small. The kind of thing you'd almost miss, and I asked Miss Ashcombe about it, because she had been reviewing the correspondence files, and I thought perhaps she had made an entry error. Evelyn set her pen down. "What did she tell you?" "That she had flagged it herself, and that you were aware of it. That you and she were addressing it together." He stopped turning his hat. "I should have come to you directly. I know that. But Mrs. Holloway had made it clear that Miss Ashcombe was operating with significant trust in the household. And I didn't want to." He stopped. "You didn't want to create a conflict," Evelyn said. "No, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. Coles was not a dishonest man. He was a cautious man, cautious in the way of someone who has spent 2 decades learning which battles were his to fight and which were not, and who had made the specific error of assuming that a woman with social access to the household must have professional authorization to match. "Did you touch the ledger entries?" she asked, directly. "Any of the 9 that were altered, no immediate." Firm, "I did not." "Did you know the account the redirected funds went to?" "I did not know it existed until the formal review." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she reached into the stack of documents and produced the written record of the formal proceedings. Open to the section that documented the evidence sources. "Your name is not in here as a responsible party," she said. "Because you were not one. But I need to know completely, and honestly, whether there is anything else that you observed in the past 3 months that you have not yet told me." He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it, rather than immediately saying no. "One thing," he said slowly. "In August, Miss Ashcombe asked me about the lockbox, the one in the sitting room." He paused. "She asked me what it contained. She said she was cataloging the estate's document storage for Mrs. Holloway. What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know." "Which was true. I knew you kept private correspondence there, but I didn't know the specifics. Did she ask where the key was?" "Yes." He met her eyes steadily. "I told her I didn't have it and that you carried it on your person." Evelyn sat with that. The lockbox. The one place she had kept the original documents, the copies that had ultimately made the entire case. Victoria had tried to find it. Coles, with no knowing why the question mattered, had given her the one answer that had protected everything. "Thank you, Mr. Coles," she said. "That's all I needed." He stood, relieved in the visible way of a man who has been carrying something and has just set it down. "Mrs. Whitaker." He stopped at the door. "For what it's worth, the way you handled this. The precision of it, the documentation. I've worked in estate management for 22 years, and I've never seen anything assembled that cleanly under that kind of pressure." He paused. "Mr. Whitaker is fortunate." She looked at him. "State is fortunate," she said. "This is a distinction," he nodded. Left, she picked up her pen. The corrections were filed with the county office on Monday morning. Judge Calloway signed the completion of the formal review the same afternoon. And by Tuesday, the State Charitable Administration Office had issued a letter confirming that the Whitaker Estates Fund was restored to full compliance. Evelyn read the letter, filed it in the lockbox, and allowed herself exactly 1 moment of sitting in the quiet of the office with her hands folded and her eyes closed. 1 moment. Then she opened the ledger to the next month's charitable applications and began reviewing them. She did not notice Nathaniel in the doorway until he spoke. "The Caldwell family sent something," he said. She looked up. He was holding a small envelope, plain paper, the kind that came from a household that did not have money for stationery. "Thomas brought it this morning," he said. "It's addressed to you." She took it. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in the uneven handwriting of a man who had not spent much of his life writing letters, were 2 sentences. "Mrs. Whitaker, we received what was owed us and more. We will not forget it was you who made it right." She read it twice. She folded it and placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to where she had carried the brass key for 10 years. There will be others, Nathaniel said quietly, from the doorway. The other families, she said. I've written to each of them personally, he said. Not just the payment. A letter, explaining what happened and acknowledging that the estate failed its obligation to them. He paused. I should have written those letters years ago, regardless of any of this. The relationships should have been mine to maintain. Not only yours. This was new. Not the remorse she had seen the beginning of that on the night of the dinner. The gradual, uncomfortable recognition of a man confronting his own blind spots. What was new was the specificity of it. He was not apologizing in the general, sweeping way that men sometimes apologized when they wanted to be forgiven without doing the harder work of understanding what they were apologizing for. He was naming specific things, the letters, the relationships, the obligations. He was paying attention. Sit down. Nathaniel, she said. He came in and sat in the chair across the desk, the chair that had held. In the past week, Clara, Margaret Cole, and now he. He sat without the defensive posture he usually brought to difficult conversations. Without the particular set of the shoulders that meant he was preparing to manage a situation rather than participate in it. He sat like a man who was ready to listen. I want to talk about the estate management going forward, she said. All right. I will continue to manage the charitable fund, she said. But the accounts will be jointly reviewed each month by me. By Coles and by you, not because I need oversight. Because the work requires witnesses now. What happened is on the record. And the record needs to show that this household takes its obligations seriously at every level. Agreed, he said. The household calendar comes back to me, she said. Completely. No shared access without my authorization. Yes, and I want a formal acknowledgement in writing, filed with the county, that I am the managing director of this estate's charitable operations. Not an informal arrangement. Not something that exists by agreement between us and can be questioned or taken away. A documented position. He was quiet for a moment. Not resistant, just processing it. That's not typically done, he said. For a wife to hold a formal, I know it's not typical, she said. I'm not asking for typical. I'm asking for accurate. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not discomfort, but the particular expression of a man in the process of updating his understanding of what the situation actually required. I'll speak to the county clerk tomorrow, he said. Thank you. Is there more? She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. But the rest isn't about the estate. He held her gaze. I'm not leaving, she said. I want to be clear about that. This is my home. This is my work. I built something here and I am not going to walk away from it because it became difficult. She paused. But I need you to understand something, Nathaniel. Something that isn't about the ledger or the fraud or Victoria Ashcombe. Tell me, he said. I have been managing this household as though my presence in it was conditional, she said. As though I needed to be useful enough, efficient enough, invisible enough, to justify being here. And I did that because somewhere in the first years of this marriage, I concluded that what you valued in a wife was the absence of problems, not the presence of a person. She kept her voice even. It cost something to keep it even, but she did. I don't know exactly when I decided that, but I know it shaped every choice I made after. Nathaniel said nothing. He was listening in the specific way of a man who has understood that interrupting would be wrong. I am not going to manage this household that way anymore, she said. Not invisibly, not silently, not in a way that can be mistaken for furniture. She looked at him directly. That means you are going to have to see me. Actually see me, not the solved problems. Not the corrected guest lists, not the written speeches. Me. And that is going to require you to pay a different kind of attention than you have been. The room was very quiet. I know, he said. I'm not certain you do yet, she said. But I think you're willing to try, and that's what I'm asking for right now. Not forgiveness, not a clean slate, not a return to what things were before last Saturday. She folded her hands on the desk. Just a genuine attempt to do better. Starting now, he leaned forward. What does that look like? Specifically, Tell me what it looks like." She studied him for a moment. He meant it. The question was not defensive, not performative. It was the question of a man who had just been told he had been failing at something fundamental, and who was, perhaps for the first time in their marriage, genuinely asking for instruction. "It looks like reading the speech before the dinner," she said. He flinched. Small, but she saw it. "It looks like asking me what happened that morning instead of assuming the morning was fine," she said. "It looks like noticing when I haven't slept. It looks like knowing the names of the families in the charitable fund. Not because I've told you, but because you asked." She paused. "It looks like knocking before you come into the estate office." "I've been doing that," he said quietly. "Yes," she said, "you have this week." She met his eyes. "Keep doing it." He nodded, and Nathaniel. She reached across the desk and picked up the Caldwell letter from where she had set it before sliding it back into her pocket. "When the next letter comes from one of those families, read it. Don't hand it to me. Know who they are." "I will," he said. She believed him. That was the surprising thing, that after everything, she believed him. Not completely, not in the way she had believed him 10 years ago, when the belief was new and untested and required nothing of her. But in the harder, more considered way that came from watching a person choose, repeatedly and specifically, to do the thing that was more difficult when the easier option was available. He had not taken Victoria's offer. He had written the letters himself. He had knocked before entering. Small things. But small things were where character lived. And she had always known how to read them. The week after the formal review, Margaret Holloway asked to speak with Evelyn. She found her in the garden, not the formal garden, but the working one at the back of the property, where Evelyn sometimes walked in the late afternoon when the day's accounts were to be done, and she needed the particular kind of quiet that only came from being outside. Margaret looked different. It was difficult to name exactly how she was dressed the same, carried herself with the same posture, but something in her expression had lost the particular quality of a woman performing confidence. What was underneath it was not weakness. It was something closer to honesty. "I owe you a significant apology," Margaret said. "Yes," Evelyn said. She did not make it easier than that. "I have been," Margaret said carefully, "unkind to you. In ways that were larger than I acknowledged to myself." She paused. "I told myself for 10 years that I was simply maintaining the standards of this household. That my opinions about how a wife of this family should conduct herself were a matter of tradition and appropriate expectation." Another pause. "I told myself I wasn't hostile to you. I was simply invested in how things should be done. And now?" Evelyn asked. "Now I think I resented you," Margaret said flatly. "Because you were better at everything than I expected you to be. And because the better you were, the less necessary my involvement became." She looked at Evelyn directly. "That is not a comfortable thing to say." "No," Evelyn agreed. "But it's accurate. I allowed Victoria access to this household because she flattered me," Margaret said. "Because she asked my opinion and deferred to my experience and made me feel like my knowledge of how this estate operated still mattered." She stopped. "She was using me. I was too invested in being useful to notice." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. She thought about what it cost a woman like Margaret to say these things, a woman who had spent 62 years constructing a version of herself that did not need to apologize. That was defined entirely by her certainty about how things should be. "You came forward before the review," Evelyn said. "You gave me the written statement. It was the least I could do." "It was more than the least," Evelyn said. "It was the right thing, at the right time. That matters." Margaret looked at her with an expression that was not quite gratitude, but was the precursor to it, the expression of a woman who has not been given grace very often and is not entirely sure how to receive it. "I would like," Margaret said, "to assist with the charitable applications this month, if you would permit it." She held up one hand before Evelyn could speak. "Not to take over, not to supervise, to assist specifically the correspondence with the county families. I know most of them. I've known them for 40 years. I could facilitate introductions Smooth some of the conversations that have been made difficult by recent events. She paused. Under your direction. Completely, Evelyn considered it. Under my direction, she said. And you report to me. Not to Nathaniel, not to the county clerk. To me, yes, Margaret said. And if I tell you something is handled, it is handled. No parallel conversations, no alternative arrangements. No consulting with anyone else about decisions I have already made. Understood. Then yes, Evelyn said. You may assist. Something in Margaret's posture shifted not dramatically, but in the way of a woman who has just been given something she did not expect and is taking a moment to absorb it. Thank you, she said. They walked back toward the house in a silence that was, for the first time in 10 years, not uncomfortable. 3 weeks after the formal review, Clara came to the estate office with a letter that had no return address. The handwriting on the outside was unfamiliar. The seal was plain wax. No mark. Evelyn opened it. Inside, in a hand she recognized immediately despite the lack of signature, were 4 lines. You built something that could not be taken from you because it lived in what you knew. Not what you held. I underestimated that. Most people do. I expect you will not be underestimated again. No signature. Victoria Ashcombe's handwriting. Evelyn read it twice. Then she held it over the lamp flame and let it burn down to nothing in the small metal dish she kept on the desk for sealing wax. She did not need it in the record. She already knew everything it said. The first Monday of November. Nathaniel came to breakfast before she did. This was new. He had never, in 10 years of marriage, been at the table before her. She came into the dining room and found him already seated, with the county charitable applications spread in front of him, reading them with the focused attention he usually gave to land transactions and harvest contracts. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. The Mercer family, he said. Their barn, the one they lost in July. It says here it hasn't been replaced. It hasn't, she said. The payment was redirected, as you know. They've been managing without it. Can we do more than restore the original amount, he asked. Can we actually rebuild it? She came to the table and sat down across from him. The fund doesn't typically cover construction. It covers emergency support. But a direct contribution from the estate, separate from the fund, would be within your authority. Then I wanted that. He looked back at the application. And the Caldwell family, it says here they had a failed crop this spring. That was before any of the fraud. Was there a charitable application filed in March? She looked at him. There was. It was approved and paid. But not enough, he said. It says here the crop loss was significant and the standard payment would have been. He was calculating in his head. She could see it. Less than they actually needed. The fund has disbursement limits, she said, to ensure it serves as many families as possible. Could we raise the limits with additional contributions to the fund? Yes, he set down the application and looked at her. What would it take to double the fund's capacity by spring? She studied him for a moment, this man with charitable applications spread in front of him at breakfast, asking her operational questions about disbursement limits. This man who had 3 weeks ago not known the names of a single family the fund served. It would take a significant estate contribution, she said. A formal commitment, not a single donation. Something the county administration could rely on year to year. Draw up the proposal, he said. What it would look like, what the commitment would require, what the families would receive. Bring it to me when it's ready, and we'll submit it to the county together. She held his gaze for a moment. Together, she repeated. Your name on it, he said. Both of ours. If that's appropriate, if that's something you want. She thought about the speech she had written 3 weeks ago that had never been read. She thought about the years of documents signed with his name over hers. She thought about what it meant that he was asking. Specifically, rather than assuming. Yes, she said. That's something I want. He nodded and returned to the applications. She poured her coffee and sat across from him, and for a while neither of them spoke. Two people working through the same material at the same table. Present to the same concerns, visible to each other in the specific and unremarkable way of people who have decided, without ceremony, to try. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a romantic declaration. It was breakfast, and county applications, and a question about barn construction, and a man who had finally decided that paying attention was not optional. It was, Evelyn thought, more than she had believed she would get from him. It was also, she was beginning to believe, only the beginning. The formal document arrived from the county clerk's office on a Wednesday afternoon. Evelyn Hartwell Whitaker, managing director of the Whitaker Estate Charitable Fund designated. Documented and filed with the county administration. Her name, her position, her authority not borrowed, not informal, not contingent on her husband's goodwill. Recorded. She read it at the estate office desk, with the ledger open beside her and the November light coming through the window, and Clara at the door, waiting to see if she needed anything. "No, thank you," she said to Clara. "I'm fine." Clara left. Evelyn set the document beside the ledger. She looked at both of them, the 10 years of accumulated work in the worn leather book, and the single page that finally said in official language, with an official seal, that the work had always been hers. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew the brass key. She set it on top of the document. Then she looked at what she had built, all of it. The record and the proof and the position and the slow, hard-won change in the man down the hall who was currently, she knew without checking, reading charitable applications at his desk in a way he had never done before last month. She thought about the woman who had sat at the end of a dinner table 3 weeks ago and watched her husband raise a glass to someone else. That woman had known something was wrong. She had known it before the toast, before the ledger, before the couriers and the burned documents and the formal review. She had known it in the quieter, earlier way that women knew things they were not yet ready to act on, the slow accumulation of not being seen, the weight of 10 years of solved problems that left no visible trace of the person who solved them. She had known, and she had finally done something about it. She picked up the brass key. She did not put it on anyone else's table. She put it back in her pocket, where it had lived for 10 years, where it would stay. Because it was hers, and because trust, as she had told Nathaniel on the night of the dinner, could not be handed over. It had to be earned. He was earning it. She opened the ledger to November and began writing the first entry of a new month, her name at the top, clear and unambiguous, in the handwriting that she no longer had any intention of hiding. December came to Whitaker Manor the way it always did, cold and quiet, with the particular stillness of a property that had finished its harvest work and settled into the slower rhythms of winter accounting. But this December felt different from the ones before it. Evelyn noticed it in the small things first, the way the household staff moved, not the careful, tiptoeing movement of people managing around a tension they couldn't name. But something more settled. Clara hummed in the hallway. Thomas came to the estate office with questions he had previously taken to Coles, because somewhere in the past 6 weeks he had understood that the estate office was where decisions actually lived. The tenant families who came to the back door came with their hats in their hands and asked for Mrs. Whitaker by name, not the estate manager, not Mr. Whitaker's household, her name specifically, because word had moved through the county the way word always moved in small communities, quietly and completely. And what it said was that the woman at Whitaker Manor was the one who made things right. She was at her desk on the first Monday of December when Judge Calloway arrived unannounced. Clara showed him in. He sat in the chair across from her with the unhurried manner of a man who had something to say and had decided to say it carefully. "I've had a letter from the State Charitable Administration," he said, "about the Whitaker Fund proposal." Evelyn set her pen down. "Already?" They move faster when something correctly the first time. He reached into his coat and produced the letter. "They've approved the increased disbursement capacity, effective January." He placed it on the desk in front of her. They also want to discuss using your fund's documentation structure as a model for other county charitable programs across the state. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at him. My documentation structure, she said. The cross-referencing system. The confirmation records. The way you built the audit trail that caught the fraud. He folded his hands. Someone at the state level read the formal review materials and had questions about how the system was designed. I told them it wasn't a system in the conventional sense. It was a woman who understood that work disappears if you don't record it. And so she recorded everything. He paused. They want to speak with you directly. There will be a letter. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Judge Calloway, she said, when you received my letter, the first one, the night Clara brought it to you, what did you think? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I thought, he said, that I was reading something assembled by a person who had been waiting a very long time to be heard, and who had made sure when the moment came that she was completely impossible to ignore. He looked at her steadily. I also thought that I had been attending dinners at this manor for 7 years and had been watching you manage rooms full of people who had no idea you were doing it. And I felt, if I am honest, some guilt about that. You were kind to me, she said. I was pleasant to you, he said. There's a difference. I could have been more useful a great deal earlier. He stood. The state letter will arrive by end of week. I recommend you respond personally. He moved toward the door. And Mrs. Whitaker, when the Spring County Council meets, there will be a discussion about expanding charitable oversight in the region. I intend to recommend that a private estate representative be included in those conversations. He looked back at her. I intend to recommend you. After he left, Evelyn sat at her desk for a full 2 minutes without picking up her pen. She allowed herself that. 2 minutes of sitting with the specific, complicated feeling of being seen by people who had the authority to act on what they saw. Then she picked up her pen and wrote her response to the state administration before the day's other work began. Nathaniel found out about the state letter at dinner. She told him herself directly, plainly, without softening it into something smaller than it was. She watched his face as she explained what Judge Calloway had said. What the state wanted, what it meant for the fund, and potentially for her involvement beyond the estate's own operations. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. They want to model other programs on your system, he said. On the documentation structure, yes, across the state. Potentially. He set down his fork. He looked at her with an expression she was still learning to read. It had only appeared in the past month. This particular look, and it was different from the expressions she had cataloged across 10 years of marriage. It was not the authority face, not the charm face, not the uncomfortable face of a man being confronted with something he'd rather avoid. It was simpler than any of those. It was pride. Tell me what you need, he said. For the meetings, the travel, the preparation, whatever it requires. She looked at him. I'll need access to the county correspondence files, she said. And time the meetings will likely be in Richmond. 2 days minimum, possibly 3. Done, he said. What else? I'll need Coles to cover the estate accounts while I'm away. He'll need updated authorization. I'll speak to him tomorrow. She studied him across the dinner table, this man who 3 months ago had stood up at this same table and praised another woman for her life's work, who had not read her speech, who had not noticed what the morning cost her, who had been careless in the specific and significant way of a person who assumes that what they need will simply continue to appear because it always has. He was not that man tonight. She was not certain yet what man he was becoming. That was the honest truth she did not know, and she was not going to pretend she did. Because she had spent 10 years assuming she knew what was happening in her own marriage and had been wrong in ways that had cost her considerably. But she was watching, and what she was watching was a man doing the work. Nathaniel, she said. The barn, the Mercer family's barn. He looked up. We broke ground last week. Thomas has it in hand, she said. I heard from Mrs. Mercer. She came to the back door. Evelyn paused. She didn't come to talk about the barn. She came to ask if she could bring her daughter to the estate. Once a month, the girl wants to learn accounting. She heard somehow that I manage the fund's records, and she wants to understand how it's done. Nathaniel was quiet. She's 14, Evelyn said. She's been keeping her family's farm records since she was 11, because there was no one else to do it. What did you tell Mrs. Mercer? He asked. I told her I'd think about it. She looked at him steadily. I'm thinking about more than one girl. There are families across this county whose daughters are doing exactly what her daughter is doing, managing records, running household accounts, making decisions that keep farms operational with no formal knowledge and no one to teach them. She paused. I want to start something. A monthly session here at the estate. For young women who want to learn practical accounting and estate management. Using the estate office, the resources we have. The table was very quiet. That's not a small thing, Nathaniel said. No, she agreed. It isn't. It would require. He was thinking through it. She could see the calculations moving behind his eyes. Space, materials, your time. It would mean regular visitors to the estate. Young women from tenant families. Yes, she said. All of that. He looked at her. When do you want to start? He said. She had not been certain he would say that. She had prepared for negotiation for the reasonable concerns, the practical objections, the suggestion that perhaps they should consider it after the spring. She had been ready for all of it. She had not been ready for immediate. January, she said after a moment. After the fund disbursements are complete. I'll have the east sitting room cleared, he said. It's the right size. Better light than the office. She looked at him across the table for a moment that lasted longer than dinner time usually permitted. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said quietly. It's the right thing to do. You've always known what the right thing was. He stopped. I'm trying to catch up. The letter from the state arrived on Thursday. As Judge Calloway had predicted, it was formal, respectful, and specific, not a general inquiry, but a detailed request for a meeting with the person responsible for the Whitaker Fund's documentation practices, with the intention of discussing whether the structure could be adapted for broader county implementation across Virginia. It was addressed to Evelyn Hartwell Whitaker, Managing Director. Whitaker Estate Charitable Fund, her title, her name. In official correspondence from the state of Virginia. She read it 3 times, not because it was complicated, but because she wanted to understand fully what it meant, not just for the fund, not just for the estate, but for the specific question she had been sitting with since the night of the dinner. The question that lived underneath all the documentation and the formal review and the county clerk's letter with her name on it. The question was simple: who am I when no one is asking me to be useful? She was still working out the answer, but the letter felt like a piece of it. She was writing her response when Nathaniel came to the office door. He knocked. She noted that without showing it. Clara said the state letter came, he said. It did. She held it out. He crossed the room and took it. Read it standing beside the desk. She watched his face. Richmond, he said. They want you in Richmond, in February. I'll come with you. He handed the letter back. Then quickly, if you want me to, if that's useful. If not, I understand it's your meeting, your work. You don't need, she said. He stopped. I don't need you there, she said. But I'd like you to see it. What I do in a room like that. With people who are interested in what I've built. She looked at him. I've been doing versions of this for 10 years, and you've never once seen it. I think it's time you did. Something shifted in his expression, moved through it quickly. Something that was not quite emotion, but was the held-back version of it. Yes, he said, I'd like that. Christmas came quietly. Not the way it had come in previous years, the large formal dinner. The 30 or 40 guests, the elaborate evening that Evelyn organized down to the last candle placement, and that Nathaniel presided over with the comfortable authority of a man in his own house. This year, Nathaniel had asked her, in early December, what she wanted Christmas to look like. She had looked at him for a long moment when he asked that. Just the household. Good food, No performance. Done, he said. It was done. Christmas dinner was 10 people: Evelyn and Nathaniel, Clara and Thomas and Mary, Coles and his wife, Judge Calloway, who had no family nearby and whom Evelyn had invited because he had been quietly kind to her for years, and she believed in acknowledging that. And Margaret, who arrived with a fruitcake she had made herself, and who sat at the table without performing anything, which was the best gift she could have brought. After dinner, after the others had moved to the front parlor, Evelyn stayed at the table for a few minutes alone. She was sitting with the quiet of a house that felt, for the first time in a long time, like her own, not because anything structural had changed, not because the furniture had moved or the walls had shifted, but because the space inside it felt different when you were no longer invisible in it. Nathaniel came back. He sat down across from her, the same seats they had occupied at dinner, the same table where 2 months ago something had broken and something had begun. "Tell me something," he said. She looked at him. 10 years ago," he said, "when we married. What did you think this was going to be?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I thought," she said slowly, "that I was marrying a man who wanted a partner, who wanted someone who would work alongside him, who would bring her own capabilities to something they built together." She paused. "I found out fairly quickly that what you wanted was someone who would manage the parts of your life you found inconvenient." Without making those parts visible, he held her gaze. "I know, I told myself it was enough," she said. "For a long time, I told myself that competence was its own reward, that the work mattered regardless of whether it was seen." She looked at her hands. "I was wrong about that. The work matters, but so does being seen doing it. I'm seeing you now," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." The words landed in the quiet between them, not a declaration, not a romantic resolution, but the plain and honest truth of a woman who had spent 2 months deciding what she was willing to rebuild and had arrived, carefully and with full awareness of what it cost her, at an answer. She was still here because she had chosen to be. Not because she needed him, not because leaving would have been impossible, but because she had looked at what they could be, what he was actually becoming, slowly and imperfectly, and with genuine effort, and decided it was worth the work. She was a woman who understood the value of work. "I want to ask you something," Nathaniel said. "And I want you to answer me honestly." "I always answer honestly," she said. "I know." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "That's why I'm asking." He looked at her steadily. "Do you trust me?" She sat with the question, not performing consideration, actually sitting with it, turning it over, examining it the way she examined a ledger entry she wasn't certain about. Trust was not a simple thing, and she was not a woman who treated simple things as complicated or complicated things as simple. "I trust that you are trying," she said. "I trust that what has changed in the past 2 months is genuine and not performance." She held his gaze. "I do not yet trust that it will hold when it becomes inconvenient." "That's not an accusation. It's an honest answer." "That's fair," he said. "Trust is not restored in 2 months," she said. "It's rebuilt over time, through consistent choices, the same way a fund balance is rebuilt one correct entry at a time." She looked at him. "I'm watching the entries, Nathaniel. I always am. I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." That was the right answer. She recognized it as the right answer because it was not a defense, and it was not a plea. It was an acknowledgement that her watching was not a threat but a standard, and that a man who understood the difference between those two things was a man who had learned something real. The new year came in on a Wednesday. January moved quickly. The charitable applications for the winter season came through, and Evelyn processed them at the estate office. With Margaret's assistance, the older woman had kept her word exactly, deferring on every decision, flagging questions rather than resolving them herself, learning in her 60s the specific discipline of being helpful without taking over. It was not easy for her. Evelyn could see that. She gave her credit for it. The first session for the county girls happened on the 3rd Saturday of January. 7 of them came, ranging in age from 13 to 17. daughters of tenant families and small landowners, most of them already doing some version of account keeping for their households without any formal framework for it. They arrived at the East sitting room with the particular combination of eagerness and uncertainty of young people who have been invited somewhere they were not sure they belonged. Evelyn stood at the front of the room and looked at them. She thought about herself at 14, a farmer's daughter who had learned to read a balance sheet before she learned to waltz, who had spent her adolescence understanding that numbers told the truth about a household in ways that conversations often didn't, who had brought that knowledge into a marriage and then spent 10 years applying it in the dark. "You are all already doing this work," she said. "You've been doing it without being taught because your families needed it done. What I'm going to teach you is how to do it in a way that can't be ignored." She looked at each of them in turn. How to document, how to structure records so that they protect you, how to make your work visible so that no one can take credit for it and no one can erase it. The room was very still. One of the older girls, 16, Evelyn thought, the Mercer daughter who had prompted the whole idea, raised her hand. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "did someone try to erase your work?" The question was direct in the way that young people's questions were direct without the social cushioning that adults learn to apply, without the diplomatic softening that made hard things easier to ask but harder to answer. Evelyn looked at her. "Yes," she said, "someone tried." "What did you do?" "I had kept copies," Evelyn said. "Of everything. Because I understood early that a record kept in one place by one person is not a record, it's a vulnerability." She held the girl's gaze. "That is the first thing I am going to teach you. Not how to add numbers. How to protect what you know." The girl nodded slowly, with the expression of someone filing something away in a place where it would not be lost. They worked for 3 hours. By the end of it, all 7 of them had begun their own cross-referencing systems, basic, imperfect, but theirs. Evelyn sent them home with clean paper and the instruction that they were to bring their current household records to the next session so she could show them how to rebuild them from the beginning with proper documentation. Nathaniel was in the hallway when she came out. He had not been in the room. She had not invited him and it was not his space, and he seemed to understand that. But he had been in the house, which meant he had been close enough to hear the low rhythm of voices and work coming through the door. And he had waited, he asked. "Good," she said. "Better than good." She paused. "The Mercer girl asked me if someone had tried to erase my work." He went very still. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Evelyn said. "That someone had tried and that I had kept copies, and that keeping copies was the first lesson." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that was too layered to name. Simply guilt was part of it, and admiration, and the specific discomfort of a man understanding that the lessons his wife was teaching a room full of young women about protecting their work from being taken were lessons that had been learned, in part inside his own house. "She's going to be remarkable," Evelyn said. "The Mercer girl. So are the rest of them," Nathaniel said quietly. "If they're anything like who's teaching them." She looked at him. She did not deflect it. She did not diminish it or redirect it or perform modesty at the expense of accepting something true. She had spent 10 years doing all of those things, and she was done with all of them. "Yes," she said simply. February came, and with it the trip to Richmond. Evelyn sat across from 3 state officials and 1 county administrator in a formal meeting room and presented the documentation structure not from memory, not from notes, but from the original materials, organized the way she always organized things, with the clarity of someone who had never needed to make her work look more impressive than it actually was, because the work itself was sufficient. Nathaniel sat in the back of the room. He did not speak. He had understood, without being told again, that this was her meeting. He was there to witness, not to manage. He sat with his hands folded and watched his wife explain to 3 people with state authority and the ability to implement what she described across a dozen counties, how to build a system that protected both the givers and the receivers of charitable support, how to make it accountable, how to make it visible, How to make it impossible to corrupt without detection. She spoke for 40 minutes. At the end, the senior official leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "we'd like to propose a formal advisory role. Quarterly meetings, a small stipend, and your name attached to whatever documentation guidelines we develop." He paused. This would be official, a state-level position. She did not look at Nathaniel. She did not need to. I accept. On the carriage ride back, Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. She let him be quiet. She understood by now the difference between his silences, the uncomfortable ones, where he was avoiding something, and the ones like this, where he was sitting with something real and taking it seriously. "I watched you in that room," he said finally. "I know, they listened to every word," he said. "Not because you were louder than anyone else. Not because you demanded anything. Because what you said was exactly right, and there was no way to argue with it. That's the advantage of documenting everything," she said. "You don't have to argue. You just have to present." He turned to look at her. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the toast. Nathaniel, let me say it." His voice was quiet but firm, the firmness of a man who has decided to say something difficult and is not going to let himself off the hook. "I stood up at that table, and I gave her credit for your life. Not because I believed she had earned it, because I wasn't paying attention to who actually had." He held her gaze in the moving carriage. "I cannot undo that, I know that. But I want you to know that I understand, not in the general way I understood it the night you left the room, but completely, what I gave away in that moment and what it cost you." She looked at him. "And I want you to know," he said, "that I will spend however long it takes making sure that what happened in Richmond today, what happens every time you walk into a room and do what you do, that it is never, as long as I have anything to say about it, credited to anyone but you." The carriage moved through the February afternoon. She looked at him, this man, this complicated and imperfect and genuinely trying man, and she felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, or not only happiness, but the specific and earned peace of a woman who has fought for something real and is now sitting inside the results of that fight. "I know," she said, and she meant it in the fullest way, not as dismissal. Not as the end of a conversation, but as the recognition of something true. She knew. She had watched him choose every day in the small and specific ways that character revealed itself. And she knew. Spring came to Whitaker Manor in April, and with it the second round of charitable applications. The third session with the county girls, 11 of them now. Word having moved through the tenant families in the particular way that useful things moved, and a letter from the state confirming Evelyn's first quarterly advisory meeting. One evening in late April, Nathaniel found her in the estate office after dinner. She was at the desk, the ledger open, writing the final entries for the spring disbursements. The lamp was burning low. Outside, the property was quiet in the particular way of spring evenings, when the day's work was done and the light lasted longer than the work required. He sat in the chair across from her. She did not look up immediately. She finished the entry she was writing precisely, clearly, in the handwriting that had built a case and now built a record that the state of Virginia wanted to replicate, and then she set down her pen and looked at him. "Will you ever forgive me?" he asked. The question was simple. It was not dressed up or softened. It was the question of a man who had been sitting with the weight of for 6 months and had decided, finally, to simply ask. She looked at him for a long moment. "I already stopped being angry," she said. "That happened earlier than you might think." She held his gaze. "But forgiveness isn't returning to who I was. It isn't going back to the table and picking up the key and pretending none of this happened." She paused. "What it is, what I can offer you is this, what we are now, which is more honest than anything we had before, and harder." He looked at her. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She reached out and placed her hand on the ledger, the worn leather cover, the brass clasp, the accumulated weight of everything she had built and protected and refused to give away. "I can stand beside you," she said. "I want to, but I will never stand behind you again." He nodded. Not a concession, an understanding. the kind that lived in the body rather than just the mind. She opened the ledger to the next page. Now she said, "I have 3 more entries to finish before I lose the light. And tomorrow the Mercer girl is coming early because she wants to learn how to structure a grant application before the session. I'll make sure Clara has breakfast ready for her," he said. She looked up at him. He was already standing, moving toward the door, doing the small and specific and entirely voluntary thing that proved, more than any grand gesture could, that he had understood something fundamental about what it meant to support a person's work rather than simply benefit from it. "Nathaniel," she stopped. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and left her to her work. She turned back to the ledger. She picked up her pen. She wrote her name at the top of the page, not his. Not the estate's, not the household's, her name. Clear and permanent and exactly where it belonged. And Evelyn Hartwell Whitaker, Managing Director, State Advisor, teacher of 14-year-old girls who would never spend a decade invisible in someone else's house, continued to build the record of everything she had always known how to do in the light, with her name on it, in a home that had finally learned to see her. That was not the ending of a story. That was the beginning of the life she had always deserved.